The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, it's the age-old question, isn't it? What happens when we die? Well, here to tell us about his latest book, Near-Death Experiences, the science, psychology and anthropology behind the phenomenon. Welcome to the show, Anthony Peake.
Hello, delighted to be involved.
Delighted to have you on the show. And I know that you've been studying this for a couple of decades, and I'm really, really interested in the science side of it. But did you start studying this because you had personal experiences?
No, not at all. No, at all. My approach has always been interested in the science, the neurology, and the experiential of the near-death experience. Although I've had a series of quite odd experiences over the years. Effectively, my interest involves both near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, déjà vu, various other phenomena as well, and I attempt to try and link them all together.
Yeah, I was reading you had an experience when you were at school. Who is Mervyn Peake?
Oh, right, yes. Mervyn Peake is a British author. Some people may recall him. There was a TV series in the 1980s based upon his novel called Gormenghast. And he's quite a famous writer in various circles, but effectively we discovered that I am indeed distantly related to him because both Mervyn Peake and my father both met at Belsen concentration camp as part of the medical corps. My father was part of the medical corps, and Mervyn was was there for the British Army, drawing and doing paintings of the tragedy that took place there as well. So yes, that was quite intriguing.
And another example, in 2006, you received an email from a family in Australia.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was quite peculiar in that many years ago, I wrote an academic paper, a peer-reviewed academic paper, which was published in the Journal of Near-Death Experiences, which is published by an organisation called IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And I was contacted by the family in Australia, and there'd been a knock on their front door one lunchtime. And they went to the front door. They were in Perth, a place called Serpentine, in fact, outside Perth. And there was a Buddhist monk standing there. And the Buddhist monk had an email address. And he requested that because he didn't have email access in the Buddhist monastery, could they contact this person with the email address, and he would return in a week's time because they wanted the person's address. Now, that person was me. And it seems that, to cut a long story short, a copy of my first article on near-death experiences had actually ended up at the monastery. And I subsequently discovered that it had been sent by a mutual friend of ours, a friend of mine who's a consultant psychiatrist. And it had been sent to the chief guy in this particular monastery, who actually, by background, had been a Cambridge-educated quantum physicist. And this friend of mine, the consultant psychiatrist, felt that this guy really needed to understand my work a little bit. And indeed, I was subsequently told, because I met the Buddhist monk a few years later, he came over to the UK and met me. And I was told by him that he believed I'd done the science of Buddhism in terms of how Buddhism believed the universe works. So it's quite flattering in many ways, but just amazing to think that your book can end up just anywhere in the world, or your writing can end up anywhere in the world and influence people, which is wonderful.
Ah, that's wonderful. What a lovely story. Well, on to near-death experiences then. I have to say, I've never had one, fortunately. Is it literally people having an out-of-body experience? Are they feeling like they're looking down on themselves?
There's around about 7 or 8 what are called the moody traits. And these are the things that people report regularly when they have either in car accidents or they have close brushes with death through illness and various other things. And basically, the traits involve various things, a feeling of being outside of your body, a feeling of floating above your body, a feeling of what's called a panoramic life review, where people turn around and say, my life flashed before my eyes, a sensation of meeting people generally known as the beings of light. And people also feel that time dilates, time slows down for them, and they visit other locations that are not this reality. And indeed, what is fascinating is there's various cases over the years where individuals have been given information in this near-death experience state, and they've brought the information back and it's been found to be correct, things they could not have possibly known. And this has long intrigued me. I mean, it's very, very common. The numbers of people around the world that have this experience is astonishing. And it's across all cultures, and it's been right across history. So, there's definitely something neurologically takes place at the point of death, which is universal. The question is, and my interest is, what exactly is it? Is it proof of life after death, or is it telling us something more about how the brain functions?
And what have you found out?
Well, I've come to the conclusion it's both. I believe that the experiences that people have are far more than hallucinations. The general argument is that what tends to happen is when somebody is dying, they suffer from something called hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen to the brain. And this supposedly brings about these incredible hallucinatory experiences. But modern science has no idea exactly what an hallucination is in the first place. So to be using something that science can't explain to explain something they also can't explain, to me is not approaching it in the right way. Now, for instance, we've no idea how the brain creates hallucinations. We do not know. We do not know how the brain can create a set of images and project it out into three-dimensional reality around you to make you believe you're floating outside of your body, or to make you believe you're encountering sometimes aliens or other beings. And I argue this is all to do with how the brain itself is structured and exactly what happens in the brain at the point of death. And to cut a long story short, I argue that there is a release of a substance in the brain, a substance known as dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. And this substance effectively brings about altered states of consciousness, but it does more than this. It breaks down the brain's ability to cut out information. In other words, everybody assumes that when you look out through your eyes and everything else, that you're seeing reality as it really is. But scientists know that this is not the case. In fact, people who believe that the world you think is outside of you is a real, genuine, one-to-one picture of what is really out there are known as naive realists. Because what they know happens is the brain literally takes information from the eyes and from the ears and everywhere else, and then it recreates inside the darkest part of the brain, the place called the visual cortex. There it recreates a visual image of what it thinks the information is telling us. Now, we know this is the fact because there's so many visual anomalies. And I'll give you one fascinating example, is that at the back of your eye, there is the retina, which is where the light rays hit when they come through your pupil. Now, the retina itself has part of it is where the optic nerve leaves the back of the eye, and it causes what's called the blind spot, which means that all of us have within our visual field an area that's blind, but we never see it. And we never see it because the brain literally fills in the information needed for us to have a full visual picture of reality. Now, the argument is if the brain can do that for one small area of the visual field, it could do it for everything. So in which case, are hallucinations something far more than simply a dream sequence or something that's projecting outwards? And I believe it is the case. And I believe this substance called dimethyltryptamine is what's called a neurotransmitter, which is the substances that facilitate communications between the cells of the brain, the neurons. Now, the reason I'm interested in this is way back in 2013, there was a researcher at the University of Michigan called Jimo Borjigin, and her team discovered something extraordinary. They found DMT, dimethyltryptamine, in the pineal gland of live rats. So for the first time, this substance had actually been discovered in the brain of a mammal. Okay, which leads people to conclude that it has a reason to be there. Now, then something really, really weird happened in 2022 when there was an elderly gentleman in Germany And again, this is in an academic paper that they can check up. It's on my website and everything. And this elderly gentleman, he was 89 years of age, and he fell off a ladder, and he was knocked unconscious. And he was rushed to hospital, and they put him under a brain scan. They were scanning his brain in 3 dimensions because they wanted to know if there was any brain damage. And while that was happening, he had a heart attack and he died. Oh. So for the first time, doctors and scientists had evidence of what happens to the brain when we die.
Yes.
And it was extraordinary. Get this, what happened was he died, his heart stopped, his brain ceased functioning. And then around about 30 seconds after he died, there was a huge amount of activity in the brain. The brain suddenly went crazy and it was firing here, there, and everywhere. And this was exactly the same thing that, again, Jimo Borghigian herself, the lady I mentioned earlier, a few years after the experiment with the rats, discovered a similar kind of phenomenon with rats. So this is evidence that something happens in the brain, and there's, particularly, to be technical about this, there's a particular wavelength of brain activity called gamma rays, gamma. And gamma is known to be to do with memories, it's to do with emotion, it's to do all these things. So could this be what the near-death experience is? Could it be that the brain actually creates it in some way?
Yeah.
But if it does create it, it means we've been evolved to experience this. It's not just something that just happens to make us feel better when we're dying. There's something more incredible going on. And I have a concept I call cheating the ferryman, which I argue that what happens when we die, in fact, is that we live our lives again. We live our lives again in the same way that the character Connors lives his day over and again in the movie Groundhog Day. And if this was the case, and we're all in the final seconds of our life, or many of us are, living in a simulation of our lives, could this explain a phenomenon that 70% of people experience around the world? Déjà vu. Have you ever had déjà vu?
Yes, I have indeed, many times, yeah.
Okay. Now, déjà vu is very, very strange, isn't it? Because it's the sensation that you feel you've done something before, that you've been somewhere before, and you have this peculiar recognition. And in fact, the technical definition of a déjà vu, or more accurately, déjà vécu, which is already lived, was put together by a guy called Vernon Neppe, who's a psychiatrist in Seattle. And he argued that it's a kind of a memory of something that's happened in an indefined period in your past, but you don't know when. So you'll go into a place or you'll meet somebody and you'll go, I've done this before, or I've had this conversation before. But there are groups of other individuals, and I used to do a regular radio spot on BBC Radio Merseyside many years ago. And I had somebody phone in, and he said he had had the most extraordinary déjà vu experience while watching television. And he was sitting watching television, and he suddenly knew what the broadcaster was going to say on the radio, on the television. And it disturbed him so much, he decided to walk out of the living room where his wife was sitting. He just walked out. And as he walked out, he said that he had a glass front door, and he saw somebody walk past the glass front door, and then he walked past again. And he thought that his time perception was slipping. But he realized he was actually perceiving the future around about 2 or 3 seconds in the future that he was seeing. And he realized he could prove it. And he told me this on live radio. He turned around and he said he waited outside the living room door of his house. And as soon as he knew, he wrote down what his wife would say to him the minute he walked into the room. And he walked into the room, she said the words, and he handed her the piece of paper with the exact words that she said to him.
Crikey.
Now to me, is evidence that we can, under certain circumstances, be aware of what's happening in the future, which is scientifically impossible. But we know from people that have precognitive dreams, we know from people who, when they have out-of-body experiences, they seem to experience other realities. Now, again, I don't know how much time we've got here, but
we're fine. It's mega interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys will love this. There is an associate of mine. I wrote a book a few years ago on the out-of-body experience, which is similar to related to the near-death experiences, when people feel they can get outside of their body and they view the world from somewhere outside of their body. And I argued that in fact it was an hallucination. It was something that we were going inwards and using our memories to create an environment. And I was contacted by a writer and researcher called Graham Nichols. And Graham Nichols contacted me and he said, your writing is very interesting, but you're not quite right. And he said, I know, because I experience out-of-body experiences. I've written a number of books on them. And I know that I'm outside of my body and I'm looking at things that I can bring information back. Graham and I met up and we've now become very good friends. But Graham told me the most extraordinary thing. Now, get this was witnessed. In 1999, he was giving a lecture. In December 1999, he was giving a lecture in London. And when he was giving a lecture, he suddenly felt his legs buckle under him. And he felt himself falling to the ground. And suddenly, he was out of his body. And he said he was in what he can only describe as a jungle. And he could feel the heat around him. He could feel the sounds all around him. And there's all tall grass around him. And he walks and he parts the tall grass and he stands outside. And to his astonishment, he was standing on the corner of Wardour Street and Old Compton Street in Soho, in London. And he's just standing there. And meanwhile, he can hear the distant voices of people calling to him, saying, Graham, are you okay? And he realised it was the people in the lecture theatre trying to bring him to. So he could hear these voices in the distance, but he's somewhere else. And he said a young boy ran past him and he felt the air displacement as the kid ran past him. And he looked down Old Compton Street, I think it was, to see an explosion take place halfway down the street. And people are struggling out of the pub covered in blood. And people are screaming and everything. And then he finds himself rising up and he's coming to on the lecture floor. And the first thing he says to about 6 or 7 people surrounding him is, there's going to be a bomb attack. And he gave the exact location soon. These people have signed affidavits that he did this. 5 days later, you may remember there was a nail bomb in a pub called the Admiral Duncan in London. He saw that 5 days before it happened in an out-of-body experience.
Blimey.
Absolutely to the location. So this is not him turning around and saying, oh, I saw a plane crash that I wasn't sure where it was. Or he made a very vague prediction. He made a precise prediction about a precise location. Now, to me, you could argue that was coincidence. But how many levels of coincidence have you got to stretch your statistics to say it was just chance?
Yeah, that's a massive coincidence if that's the case.
Totally.
Absolutely. So do you think... Do you think this is the same then? I know we're talking about near-death experiences, but when you get the real mediums and the real fortune tellers, for example, do you think it's all connected?
Yeah, I do. My writing. I've now written 13 books. And, my book sales are around about 180,000 books worldwide now. And the overall theme of my books is understanding how all extraordinary phenomena, all extraordinary experiences are all part of the same experience. It's just we interpret them differently because they're in different circumstances. And indeed, I've worked very closely with mediums. And indeed, I on 2 occasions, I've been invited to a place called the Arthur Findlay College, which is in Stansted Mount Fitchett in Essex, very close to Stansted Airport. And it's a grand old house, and they train mediums there. And every year, they used to have a conference with scientists or researchers to meet with mediums. And one of my friends was one of the mediums involved, a lady called Susan Laybourne, who is extraordinarily accurate, by the way, in her predictions. As a friend of mine, she predicted this friend of mine would go to live in the south of France, would meet an American there, and they would work together. And she said, and you will work with a movie starring Nicolas Cage. Now, that was absolutely precise, and it's exactly what came to pass. She went down to the south of France, and she met this film director. And while they were there, the phone rang one day. And there was an American guy on the other end of the phone. And he said, hi, I've read the script for your new movie that you're trying to get made. And he said, I want to act in it. He said, my name's Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage then came down to the south of France, and you can check this movie out. It's called The Colour Out of Space. And Nicolas Cage starred in it. Now, I know that this lady, Susan Laybourne, predicted this as a medium 2 years before. Amanda, my friend, Amanda Radcliffe, actually went down there. But that's not the reason I'm telling you this, because when I was at this event, Susan was doing a lecture, and she said, Tony, you're very cynical about this. And she was lecturing people on how to get in touch with their higher self or their spirit guides. And she asked me to stand on stage. And she said, now, I wanted to stand on stage, and I was an audience of about 50 or 60 people. And she said, right, now make your mind go blank and imagine there's somebody standing on your shoulder. Somebody standing next to you. What's that person telling you? What's that person making ideas come in your mind? And suddenly, in my mind's eye, I was standing in a kitchen watching an older lady and a teenage girl arguing. And the kitchen was really weird because the actual kitchen, all the doors were off the kitchen units. So it was really weird. And I just spouted this out to the audience. And a woman stood up. She goes, oh my God, this is extraordinary. She turned around and she said that she was a school teacher. And the day before, she'd been arguing with one of her pupils about what university to go to. And she said, but the curious thing is, she said, because I knew I was coming to this event, my husband and I have arranged to have our kitchen redone. And when I was talking to the young girl, the kitchen fitters had come in and taken all the doors off the units. And I'm standing there, I'm absolutely astonished. It's what I saw in my mind. And Susan just looked at me and said, see, I told you.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's fascinating stuff. Sadly, we are now out of time, but it really is fascinating. And our listeners can hear more about this from the book called Near-Death Experiences, The Science, Psychology and Anthropology Behind the Phenomenon by Anthony Peake, who we're chatting to now. And am I correct, Anthony? It's not out till December this year?
It's out in the United States already, and in fact got to number 5, I think, in the Audible for near-death experiences. And the Audible and Kindle are out in the UK already. And the actual hardback book will be out now in March. There's some kind of problems with my publishers in terms of their distribution, but it will be out in March.
Okay. And if people want to find out more about your other books, do you have your own website?
I do indeed. It's anthonypeake.com. I also have my own YouTube channel. Just literally Google me or go onto YouTube and just put in Anthony Peake. There's hours and hundreds of hours of interviews and everything else I've done there.
Wonderful.
Just check it out.
It really is fascinating. Thank you so much for telling us a bit about it on today's show.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Okay,
bye.
See ya. Bye.